Hello, everybody, and welcome to the PHLY Draft Show with Fran Duffy. A beautiful Thursday afternoon, and we are closing in. It's draft month. Fran, how you doing? How's your workload these days?
It's the time of the calendar where, I mean, it's been this way for the last few weeks where I'm like, all right, like, do I watch 2 games of a guy I've never done, or do I go back and do 2 more games of Jade Barron, right? Like, it's those kind of battles.
Because you keep worrying about that one.
Right, or, you know, it's those kind of dynamics, but then also, since pro days have now, like, come to a close, now I can start having more calls with it, because the scouts, when they're, you know, during the pro day circuit, you can only talk to them like middle of the night. Because they're extremely busy, they're on the road, a lot of travel, or they're coming back to the buildings for 30 visits. They're all over the place. So being able to like catch up with them over these last couple days, now that the pro day circuit's coming to a close, you're incorporating that. But also it's like, all right, final mock draft, final big board, like all that, you know. So you're prepping all of your information for that stuff. So it's yeah, the clock's ticking. Zach put out the tweet for the PHLY Eagles show later, and he was like, "Oh yeah, 3 weeks until draft day." And I was like, "Oh my god!" I was like, "Yeah, Zach, you're right. It's 3 weeks." So here we are.
That's how I feel about the due date for this baby.
Yeah, I mean, you're a little tighter, right?
19 days, or something like that. Yeah, crazy. Anyway, if you are a diehard, which I imagine if you're watching the show, you got to be a diehard, because if you care at all about Fran Duffy's NFL draft opinions, you might as well just step on inside his brain and check out the Fran Duffy Die Hard Draft Guide. We've also got team-specific 100s if you are an Eagles fan or a Cowboys fan or whatever it is. But from a content standpoint, even beyond that, Fran, what will we expect from you over the next couple of weeks?
Yeah, so we're going to do I'm thinking I'm going to do another version of the mock draft I did last week, where it's the basically the aggregated mock draft, where it's like, all right, looking just at mocks from your notable draft analysts and insiders, right? So, because honestly, what's going to happen is everybody else is putting out their final mocks, and this is what I'm hearing, kind of thing. And I've done this exercise just for me over the last like 2 or 3 years. Huge swings happen in this time. So I'm going to do another one. I'll put another one out in the next few weeks. I'm going to have my final mock draft, which will be a 7-round mock draft.
And what's that going to be? For like Monday of draft week?
No, I will probably do that the week before. Actually, probably will be like Monday of draft week. Yeah, okay. It takes a couple days to do the 7-round mock. So yeah, it'll be either Monday or Tuesday of draft week, and then honestly, I'll be working up until the week of for my final big board. Like I'll constantly just be watching and tweaking that. So make sure you're a diehard so you can get access to all of that. All
right. Well, let's get into the conversation. We want to do some superlatives on the show today. Now, the last couple of weeks, I think we've had good shows. We're sort of running down some of the red flags that some guys might have. Let's be a little bit more positive.
Yeah, we're very negative.
We're going to be, there's going to be some come downs a little bit, but you know, in this draft, all that stuff. But let's be a little bit more positive. And so let's start with, these are the guys you're going to bang the table for. If I tell you this player is going to overperform their draft slot, who are like your guys and that you want to focus on? That's what we're going with first. The guys who you think are going to overperform their draft slot.
So I've got 2 here that definitely I wanted to bring up. And we're going to and they're both actually on defense. And we're going to start with a player that I've been high on since the first time I studied him this fall, and that's Walter Nolen, the defensive tackle from Ole Miss. If you are a diehard and you paid attention to that mock draft I posted last week, that the guy that's been most often mocked to the Eagles at 32, Walter Nolen, the defensive tackle. And now, when I watched him back in the fall, I was really big on the skill set. You know, this is a guy that can win with quickness. He can win with power. He can win with technique. He can win with effort. He can just win in so many different ways. There were flashes of like the dominance that Jalen Carter showed at Georgia. I'm not saying that he's Jalen Carter, the prospect, but to me, I think when you're looking at Walter Nolen, he could be a high impact interior disruptor against the run and the pass. I was just a really big fan of his game. Went to the Senior Bowl. I thought he had a good week down there. Didn't work out at the Combine. But one of the things I like about diving into the numbers the way that we have over the last few weeks is that I haven't gone through the full analytical profile by the time when I've watched these guys for the first time. Like when I watched Walter Nolen, I had a partial profile from when he was a 2-year kind of rotational player at Texas A&M, former 5-star recruit. So now we got the final numbers after the season goes through, and I feel even more convicted about the profile with Walter Nolen. We talked about Shamar Stewart last week and that production score that I put on all defensive players. For defensive linemen, it takes into account tackles, TFLs, sacks, hits, and hurries. It's all weighed together. It's put into a formula on a per-snap basis, and it spits out a number. Walter Nolen is in the 90th percentile from a production score standpoint by my count. Now, when I look at who are the other guys that are in the 90th plus percentile, that were drafted on day 1 and day 2
Okay.
over the last decade. So these are talented players, always around the ball. This is the list. Levi Onwuzurike, good starter. Braden Fisk, good start, 1-year starter, good player for the Rams last year. Dexter Lawrence, Vita Vea, Jalen Carter, Jeffrey Simmons, Kalijah Cansey, Chris Wormley, 1 backup.
Okay.
Kobe Turner, Christian Barmore, Jonathan Allen, Quinnen Williams. That's a freaking good list. That's good company.
So this is what every time we talk about Walter Nolen, like why is he talked about as a back end of the first round guy? In this draft, it feels like to me he's like a 15th overall kind of guy.
That's why. And watching him, I was like, yeah, like this is as soon as I watched him it was like October or November. I tweeted out immediately. We tweeted out a few clips, and I was like, this guy's a top 20 talent in the draft, easy. And honestly, in any class, I would look at him and say, like, this is where he should go. Why is he only being talked about like in the 30s or in the late 20s? I have seen him as high as 8 in a mock draft.
Okay.
We can go through like the range. Actually, yeah, we are. I think we're going to do that later in the show. We're going to go through the range of potential Eagles targets, but I'll get into that in a little bit. But yeah, I mean, he's all over the board in the first round, and a lot of mock drafts he's falling into the second round. When you talk to scouts about like the off field, because that feels like that's why insiders and analysts are dropping him down a little bit. It's nothing crazy. It's nothing like, oh yeah, like this is a huge red flag. Is it perfect? No, but yeah, I mean, just a little bit raw and unrefined. To me, and then the other one too. Like I talked about the Shamar Stewart, the run stop rate. Like, all right, run stops, meaning like an unsuccessful run for the offense. The guy makes the tackle. Of the day 1 and day 2 picks, he's in the 90th percentile in run stop rate. Of those guys, it's Ed Oliver, Jeffrey Simmons, Jalen Carter, Chris Jenkins was a 2nd round pick last year. Quinnen Williams, Christian Barmore. It's like, these are all really, really good players that he's in that company with, graded out really well in the run game and the pass game. All the efficiency metrics are pretty good. Final season, really good. Senior Bowl, really good. I don't know. I feel really good about the profile, and I love the tape.
And so, I mean, let's say he does go earlier than he's pegged to go right now. Let's say he does go top 20. You would still think that he's gonna overperform. You believe in the player that much?
I believe if he went,
because I'm thinking about like who's going to be the second defensive tackle off the board.
I know
after Mason Graham.
Yeah,
like Kenneth Grant. No one's going to take Kenneth Grant over him, right? Like
no, I think that there's like talk about Kenneth Grant, like Derek Harmon.
Like people love Darius Alexander, but you're going to take a 25-year-old from Toledo over Walter Nolen?
That would be surprising. Yeah, I know.
And so then you just think about like the position scarcity. Like maybe he will just get bumped up the board.
You would think.
I don't know.
Yeah, you would think. It's just
you're wearing your Ole Miss blue. I like that.
Yeah, it's very blue today. But yeah, it's I think when you're looking at Nolen, the talent speaks for itself. The numbers speak for themselves. Why he isn't going as high in mock drafts, I don't know. But if he were to go as late as what we're projecting, I think he outperforms that slot.
Okay. You have another player who is probably more of a second round level guy, and that is Notre Dame safety Xavier Watts.
Yeah, Xavier Watts, this is a player that was a 2-time All-American, one of the leaders in interceptions the last 2 years. I believe it was 7 picks in 2023, came back and had 5 this past season for the Irish on their way to the national title game. Everything off the field that you want. The one question that people have, despite the fact that he's got like these ball hawking tendencies, like average athlete, average physical tools. I think you can see some of those limitations when he does come downhill to defend the run. He can have some missed tackles. He's one of those tackles, run defenders, Bo, that will come down and he breaks down in the hole, like will try and come to balance and then finishes a tackler. In those situations, that's where the misses come up. He's not a guy that's just going to fly downhill and run through a guy, but that's the way that they coached it at Notre Dame. It's all right, we're going to teach you to break down in the hole. Some coaches teach it that way. Some coaches teach it the other way. Watts was a captain this past year. Again, everything off the field you like. I love production, right? And so when I'm looking at Xavier Watts, I will look at ball disruptions, okay? So what I define as ball disruptions, that's interceptions and PBUs put together. Watts had 31 of them in his career. That's 90th percentile among safeties drafted in the last decade. There have been 20 safeties that have hit that mark in that span. I don't need to go through the list of all 20, but I will say 12 of those 20 became starters, including a couple of blue players in Minkah Fitzpatrick and Kevin Byard. Only 2 of those 20 completely busted out of the league or bounced around as fringe roster guys. All the rest of them stuck as quality backups. So when you talk about safeties that show the propensity to get their hands on the football, to me, like I really like what Xavier Watts has put on film. I liked the tape. You look at the production, feel really good about it. Only 2 safeties hit that number as well, by the way, that did it in as many starts as Watts. He only started 33 games, so showed that ability. Basically, he got his hands on the ball once per game. I'll take that. I'll take that at safety.
I think this brings up another. Then this is a bit of an Eagles tinged conversation, but I don't know that. To me, I'm looking at these profiles. Safety seems like one of the better position groups in this class. If you're talking about just like top 3 rounds, like the top 5 safeties, Malachi Starks and Nick Emmanwori, both probably first-round picks. You like both of those guys a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Watts is your safety 4. You got Jonas Sanker, who's safety 3, and then even Kevin Winston Jr. All 5 of those guys, to me, feel like wherever they go in the first 2 rounds, probably pretty good picks.
Yeah, and honestly, too, like I think when you're looking at Sanker, like I know I'm high on him, but most of the feedback I've gotten is like 3rd, 4th round.
Okay.
Xavier Watts, it does feel like he's going to go day 2. Kevin Winston Jr. brought up from Penn State. Even though he's coming off the ACL, does feel like that's probably like 3rd round. If he's healthy, he's probably going top 50, top 60.
Do you? Now this was a bit of a newsy thing. He went and ran his 40 despite coming off the ACL. Is that a thing that's going to move the needle for you at all in your grade?
From everything I understand, like it's just and this has been not just like talking with people that have been around him now, but even like going back at Penn State, he's like A+ off the field.
Okay.
And like so that when I saw like, oh, this guy like got back on the field and was working out this fast off the ACL, was not surprising at all to see that.
Okay. Because Sanker was one of the guys that I was thinking maybe overperformed the draft slot as well. And that's mostly just trusting you.
Yeah, right.
But I like the profile. And so, yeah, to me, for the Eagles, I don't know. Maybe safety does make sense at some point in the first 2 rounds just because of who's going to be on the board.
Yeah, I mean, if Malachi Starks or Nick Emmanwori's there at 32, and that's what I mean. I would be hard pressed to say like they're not the best player available because I have them
unless
both.
Walter Nolen's on the board.
Well, I have higher grades on them. I think they're both in the same bucket, like horizontal board, like they're both in the same tier, and both have higher grades than Walter Nolen. And then it just comes down to like, all right, like would you rather have the interior disruptor at D tackle versus the safety? My guess is the D tackle wins out in that conversation.
Probably so.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's move on to. We'll drop down a little bit here. We'll get a little bit negative, and it doesn't have to be negative as much of just what the value for them is going to be. When you think of a player who you are expecting to underperform their draft slot, who comes to mind?
Yeah, we talked about it a little bit a couple weeks ago in the offensive show. And that was the thing, is that since we just had this conversation about both sides of the ball.
There are a lot of guys who we don't want to redo the conversation on Quinshon Judkins or Shamar Stewart. Yeah, different conversations.
I touched on it briefly a couple weeks ago, but I wanted to dive in and just having conversations with people over the last couple days. I think the Jaxson Dart conversation is really interesting, just because. Look, I was talking with somebody a couple days ago, and it was a scout, an area scout. Yeah, I was talking with somebody after talking about doing guys and
my Lyft driver.
But with Jaxson Dart, honestly, the film when I studied him this year was very similar to the film I watched a year ago. And coming into the season, everybody kind of viewed Jaxson Dart day 3 pick, probably a backup.
Yeah.
Coming out of the season, coming out of the fall, as soon as the season ends, season's over, football's done. Everyone's like, yeah, like. That's probably what Jaxson Dart is. Nothing special trait-wise. Highly schemed offense. They Lane Kiffin, they do so much to scheme guys open. A lot of like wide open receivers. And when you look at that offense, because we'll talk about this a little bit with another player, they are extremely productive. But when you look at the players that have come out of that offense in recent years, not a lot of guys have hit. Right? Like it's just a really like highly schemed offense. And when I look at Dart, I think that there's a lot to like from this guy can be a backup quarterback. But when we're talking about he's going to be a starter, he's going to be a top, he can go number 3, he can go number 21, he's going in the first round. Everyone I've talked to, and I shouldn't say, I've talked to a couple scouts about it, Southeast scouts over the last couple weeks, and they're like, I just don't see it. So where did this come from? It started after the Senior Bowl, where the guy, again, following up with them, they were like, he didn't move the needle down there. The one stat that I brought up a couple weeks ago, and I'll bring it up again. We talk about pressure to sack rate as a really good indicator, a predictor for future NFL success. And I do think that is a good one to look at. Another one that I've started to look at as well is how often a quarterback scrambles when moved off his spot. So basically, is he going to, when he's pushed off his spot, from the rush, Is he looking to throw?
Is he
or
keeping his eyes downfield? Or
yes. Jaden Daniels had like the worst pressure to scramble ratio of anybody in the last decade. 62.4% of the time he was pressured, he was running. Now Jaden Daniels goes in the NFL. He's got, but
that's not it's not worst. It's descriptive.
Yes, thank you very much.
It's not a qualitative thing.
That is the right term to use there. Now, what I would say is that's probably an outlier when you look at future NFL success. The other guys on this list, I'm just going to roll right down the list. Jaden Daniels, Michael Pratt, Matt Corral, Hendon Hooker, Jacoby Brissett to turn into a backup, Jake Rudock.
Brissett is interesting because you would think you want an athlete.
Right, exactly. Kellen Mond, Trey Lance, Chad Kelly, Justin Fields, Dorian Thompson-Robinson, Tommy Stevens. Like you just go down the list and it's like, all right, like these guys haven't really made it in the NFL. And I think when you're looking at Dart, he doesn't have, because we look at Fields, like he's had flashes of being a really good starter. We know obviously Jaden Daniels had an outstanding rookie year. Those guys have elite athletic traits. Jaxson Dart's a nice athlete. He's not that kind of athlete. And so when I look at it, that is one thing that kind of sticks in my mind. He operated a highly schemed offense. When he was pushed off his spot and had to operate out of structure, he just kind of won by running around. I'm not taking that guy in the first round. I can't get there.
Yeah, and I mean, listen, I think generally Lamar Jackson is an obvious counterpoint, and so is Jalen Hurts. But generally speaking, when you're talking about quarterbacks who are drafted at the tail end of the first round or in the second round, usually those don't work out.
Yeah.
Because if it's a quarterback, you're going to get pushed up the board. And if you're just sort of trying to have your cake and eat it too and get by with a lesser quarterback, it doesn't usually work.
Agree. And honestly, with both those guys were like just outside the bottom 20th percentile in this number. But again, like you're talking about guys that have the traits to not necessarily overcome that, but you're like, if Jalen Hurts takes off to run, that's typically a good thing. Lamar Jackson takes off to run, that's exactly a good thing. If Nate Peterman, who was high on that list, he takes off to run, that's not a good thing, right?
Good boy.
That's what I mean. Like looking at those numbers, that's.
Do you have that whole list there? I'm curious who was at the other end of the list. Who were the guys who, when they were pressured, did not scramble?
You mentioned that it's a predictor, it's a descriptor, not a predictor. You don't want to be on the other pole of this either. Okay. The other side of it is not good. The other side of this is it's not a good list. It's a lot of red here. So you have Mike White, Davis Webb, Brad Kaya, Ryan Finley, Tanner Lee, Josh Rosen. These are guys that can't run.
Right.
So it's like, all right, you have to find that line in between. And that's why it's but I'm also, you go a little bit further down, and that's when you get to Dak and CJ Stroud, Trevor Lawrence, Justin Herbert, Patrick Mahomes, and that's like in the above average number, not in like that side of the poll.
Interesting. So my one for a guy who's going to underperform their draft slot is not about the player, and it's really more about this draft in particular, and that's Ashton Genty.
Yes.
Okay. And so
interesting.
Ashton Genty is awesome. Love it. And I think the reason he's going to go in the top 10, most likely it seems like, or call it from 6 to 14.
I would be shocked if he's not the Raiders pick at 6.
Really?
Yeah, I think that's the pick at 6.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I just lived through the Saquon Barkley season.
Right.
Okay, a guy who was taken second overall and completely changed the course of an entire franchise. But let's keep in mind that was his second team.
Yep.
Okay, and I just think that I understand taking Ashton Genty in the top 10 in this draft because maybe there's nobody else who you think deserves that pick, and you're going to you're hitting a single or maybe a double as opposed to swinging for a home run because there's so much volatility in what these guys could be. But when we look back on this in 2 or 3 years, there are going to be players who were drafted 10 spots after him who turned out to be very good players at more important positions. And I also think part of the lesson from Saquon's season was an elite running back can't do it on his own.
Yep.
And so if you're putting an elite running back, you're putting this great engine into the bad car body. I don't know if that's the right amount enough of a car guy.
I'm with you.
Or maybe it's vice versa.
Yep.
It's not going to look as good as it would if Ashton Genty goes to a team that already has pieces, that has a really good offensive line or other weapons to throw to. And so he's not going to look like an elite running back probably until he gets into a better position.
Yep.
And so that's why it's more of a big picture conversation about using that pick. And I don't necessarily think it's that bad of a pick because if there's nobody else that you're sure of, that's fine. But I do think that looking back, it's going to look a little bit underwhelming. It's not unlike Bijan Robinson, right? Who's been a good player.
Yep.
but not worthy of a
Not
top
moving
10 pick,
not
right?
moving the needle for the Atlanta Falcons. Yeah, I think that's to me. And I mentioned like I would be surprised if he's not a Las Vegas Raider in 3 weeks.
Crazy.
I wouldn't be doing that, right? Like I feel like that. I would feel a little bit better if I were the Chicago Bears. And even still, like I've had that conversation with our CHGO crew because there are a lot of Bears fans that want Ashton Genty. It's like, yeah, I think you're still a year away from making that pick. Like I know they've added to the offensive line. Yeah. I would still be trying to add another lineman, like offense or defense, like another impact. I think you still need to kind of eat your vegetables a little bit. I think the Raiders even more so.
It's like the Raiders are trying to just shotgun to 500,
1,000%.
and they're bringing in Pete Carroll. Let's just be competitive.
Yeah, I think that they're looking at it, and he said in his opening presser, he was like, essentially like, I'm old. I want to win right now. Yeah. I'm not. All the other places I've been, it took. We took our time and did it the right way. Like that's not what this is going to be. We're here to win right now. Like he said that in the opening presser. And I'm like, okay, like he's probably going to come in and try and run. They've made all these other additions at different positions. He took Kenneth Walker in the second round. And then they came back the very next year and spent another round 2 pick on a running back. Like I don't think positional value matters to Pete Carroll. I think they're going to take Ashton Genty.
And then the other one I was going to talk about, we've talked about a bunch of these players over the past couple of weeks. Darius Alexander. It's hard for me to believe a 25-year-old with that little production is going to be an impact player in the top 50 picks or wherever he's getting selected. But Matthew Golden is the other one who comes to mind for me. Yeah. Just because I think he's going to get pushed up the board. Right. It's possible he's wide receiver 2, right? Yep. Because of that speed. And
are you counting Travis Hunter in there?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
It's possible he goes over McMillan, right?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to make sure.
Yes. Yeah. And so just the, my wide receiver buckets, young and fast, but not that productive. Right. It's not a great bucket to be in for those first and second round picks. And everybody needs receivers. Those guys get pushed up the board. I don't see I don't see Brian Thomas in Matthew Golden. So that's one that I have on mine.
Yeah, I think the next time you show me a clip of Matthew Golden on film running 4.29 will be the first time I've seen it. He did not look like that on tape. I was very surprised by that time when we were out in Indianapolis because that was one where I'm like, all right, like if he gets like high 4.4s, that's probably a win. And he goes 4.29. That's just not what I saw on tape. To your point, so they have like basically it's the target share, the percentage of targets per receiving snap. Matthew Golden had 18.5. That is an extremely low number for a wide receiver in their final season. I'm just going to pull this up since I'm doing it on the fly.
I love this.
But that is...
I want these numbers, man.
Yeah, it's a lot of numbers. All right, so 18.5. Yeah, that is actually that is 22. So that's the 15th worst of any receiver drafted in the last decade. The only other day one and day 2 picks that had a worse number. Henry Ruggs, who was on his way to being
an underwhelming early career. Yes.
Adonai Mitchell went in the second round last year. So still jury's out there. And Terry McLaurin, who hit.
Okay.
And
but you don't want to be chasing the Terry McLaurin profile. That was a very
and especially with where we're talking about Golden going potentially as early as 12 to the Dallas Cowboys. That's a tricky situation.
Okay. Let's play a little bit more prognostication as opposed to prediction here.
Okay.
Tell me someone who you think is going to be drafted earlier than what is currently their expectation.
Ooh. Okay. All right. So I mentioned that I did the mock draft exercise a week ago, and one of the things that there are a few things that I feel like you take away from that exercise. You can do if you want to like individually like look at one team, you can say like okay like. Most analysts feel that they're going to address edge rusher or defensive line or, however you want to kind of look at it that way. Or you can look at it on a pure like prospect standpoint. And this is how teams do it as well. The teams are doing it, a similar kind of exercise. But teams are looking at it, all right, what is the range for this player? Where do people think that this player is going to go? So when I'm looking at Mykel Williams, the pass rusher from Georgia, this was the range that was, again, it was a 36 mock draft sample. This is from the Daniel Jeremiahs, the Mel Kipers, the Dane Bruglers. Like it's all their mock drafts over the last 3 months. The highest was Mykel Williams at 7 overall. He went there 3 times to the New York Jets. He went 8 times to the Carolina Panthers at number 8 overall, 9 times to the New Orleans Saints. That's where he ended up going in the mock draft. So most of these mocks had him over there. Now, that said, there were a lot of mocks where it was, so I've got 1, 3, 4, 9, 10, 12, 13, 14 of them where he's in the second half of the mock draft, where he's past pick 14. So when I'm looking at this, I'm like, okay, there's a wide variance here for this player where you've got a decent amount where he's in the top 10, but almost half of these mock drafts where he is falling to the back end of round 1. None of them had him falling out of the first round. So everybody says, all right, first round pick, but it's 50-50 on whether he's going to be a front half of the first round player or a back end of the first round. I personally feel like he's going to go in the top 10. I think that he is a player, to me, when I'm looking at this edge rush class, I think that you can excuse away some of the lack of production there with him. He's been more productive than a lot of the pass rushers and defensive linemen we've seen from Georgia in recent years, because that was a knock on Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis and Nolan Smith. You go right down the line, all those guys. I think when you're looking at Mykel Williams, he had a pretty big ankle injury that he suffered in week 1 last year against Clemson, missed some time, came back, fought through it, clearly was not 100% when he got back into the lineup, but was kind of a part-time player for them through a chunk of the season and really wasn't fully healthy until he got towards the back end. So I think when you're looking at Williams, you can kind of explain away some of the production there. On top of the normal usage, he still had 4.5 sacks last year, which is more than Shamar Stewart had in his entire career. Right? So I think when you're looking at Mykel Williams, I feel good about this profile. We don't have a full athletic profile there on him,
right.
But I think when you're looking at statistically, traits-wise, in this class, I think he's going top 10.
Well, and also if you just think about it from a statistical standpoint, if there's a player who some people think is a top 10 player and some people think is number 40, and then there's a player who everybody agrees is like 25, well, chances are it just takes one team.
Exactly.
And so as long as one of the teams who sees him as a top 15 player is on the board, then it is likely that he goes higher than whatever his average would be.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I like about doing that exercise too, is that because when I'm cataloging it, it's like, all right, like I can see the date of the mock draft, so you can start to see what are the trends with this player as well. We're starting to say, all right, well, 8 of these mock drafts that had him going in the back end of round 1, and we can get into that a little bit later with some of these other players, but they were all pre-combine. So really, like, since the combine or since free agency started, pretty much every mock draft has him in the top 15, that kind of deal.
I will give you mine in a second, but we do have a super chat from Joe Rockhead, who has a bit of a newsy question for you, Fran. He says, wonder what your feelings were on Joe Milton and have they changed from his draft night? Of course, Joe Milton today traded from the New England Patriots to the Dallas Cowboys, I believe, Milton and a 7th for a 5th.
Well, the Patriots get a Milton, so they had to get.
You can't have 2 Miltons. Yeah, there's not enough staplers to go around.
Yeah. So really quickly, I'll pull up my notes on Joe Milton. He was a developmental player. I mean, the traits were outrageous. Outstanding athlete, one of the biggest arms I've ever evaluated. And I know he started this year. I didn't watch like all the dropbacks and stuff. I didn't go through the Joe Milton tape from New England this year. But everything you heard was like, yeah, there were times in training camp where you're like, which of these guys was the number 3 pick?
Yeah.
An erratic player, though. And this is a guy that also came from a highly schemed offense at Tennessee, where it's a lot of like vertical throws and downfield type of plays. Like tools are there. It was a fine trade, I guess, for
How
Dallas,
would you compare him tools-wise to Jalen Milroe?
I liked Milroe's film more.
Okay.
Milroe is more straight line fast. Milton is just a bigger, sturdier. Like Joe Milton is built like Cam Newton. Like he's built like Josh Allen. Like it's like 6'5", big, strong, kind of athlete. He's still explosive. Whereas when you look at Jalen Milroe, he's also pretty rocked up. Like he's built like Justin Fields, where he's a little bit thicker. He's not as lean as like Jaden Daniels is, but he is lightning fast. He's like a 4.3, low 4.4 type of athlete, whereas Milton, not quite that explosive.
But Milton, a bigger arm.
Milton is kind of a rare arm, like crazy, like easy flick of the wrist, 80-yard, like crazy arm.
Okay. My player who I think is going to be drafted earlier than the current, if you do like the grinding the mocks stuff.
Okay.
I'm also going with an edge rusher, and I'm just thinking about in this draft, if a team is on the board in the 2nd or 3rd round, and it's like, let's take a swing at a position that really matters for a guy who, if he hits his 80th percentile outcome, is going to really be a difference maker for us. And that's Oluwafemi Oladejo from UCLA, who you have talked about. The late transition to the edge, showed up at the Senior Bowl, but the profile is good athletically. He's got what you want at the position with the traits. It's like, I just think in this draft, someone's going to think, you know what, that is a swing worth taking, as opposed to trying to hit a single with a backup tight end.
And by the way, an Eagles visit that was reported last week, Femi Oladejo. So, could he? What's the earliest you could see that profile going off the board?
Late second. I think that's not crazy, right?
Yeah, I've heard it could be earlier than that.
Really?
Yeah, I've heard it could be earlier.
Because right now it's pick 100 or whatever. Right?
Yeah,
And so I think he goes sooner.
Yeah, if there were, and I think it's early for the draft, like over-unders from like like betting sites. My guess is that's like pound the over, or like earlier in the draft.
Right.
There.
Yeah.
That would be my guess. So I would agree with you.
Okay. Well, that makes me feel smart.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Idiot Sandwich with a super chat says, any notable player with a unique path like Jalix Hunt in this draft?
Jalix had a very unique path.
That's incredibly well. Some people say you can't modify unique. I disagree with that.
Right. Bear with me here. I'm just kind of buzzing through. As far as like a unique path like Jalix, I mean, he was an Ivy League safety, moves to
it's a little bit different
position. I mean,
I feel like we don't have any good. How come there aren't any good college basketball players being worked on as tight ends this draft season?
That's a good question. I mean, I feel like we've kind of reached that point where guys just know they're gonna, like, you either know or you don't that you're gonna make that move. Unique profile.
Okay, well, think about it.
Let me think about that. That's a good one, Idiot Sandwich. I'm gonna keep pondering that.
All right, let's go with the inverse now. Let's do a player who you think is likely to get drafted later than their current expectation.
Okay. Later than expectation. I'm going to go back to the defensive line. And I don't feel like super convicted on this one. And this is, I think, partially because this draft is just crazy, man. It's going to be very fun. It's going to be very unpredictable. And honestly, like, it's going to be, to me, it makes this one fun. I'm excited to cover this draft for the first time, this being my first draft, because of how unpredictable it's going to be draft night. And I think Kenneth Grant, the defensive tackle from Michigan, is a good example of why. Because there are that 36 mock draft sample, the highest I've seen him. One time he goes to 11 to San Francisco. He falls out of the first round altogether 3 times, but you're seeing him Philadelphia 32, Kansas City at 31, 7 times to Buffalo at 30, but then also 6 times to Arizona at 16. So we're all over the spectrum here, sometime between 11 and 32. So when I look at Kenneth Grant, though, a lot of traits. The traits are there. He's a 330-pound nose tackle that you're kind of dreaming on. To me, like, it's not quite Jordan Davis, because Jordan Davis went and he blew up the combine, right? And Kenneth Grant, like, while he's known for he didn't do that. It was a good showing. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, they were good numbers, but not to the level that we saw from Jordan Davis, where he vaulted himself into that discussion. I don't know that we've necessarily seen that from Kenneth Grant. Now, he's been a touch more productive than Jordan Davis was. So there's a give and take. If you're looking for, like, refined, step in, day one, he's definitely going to make an impact. Kenneth Grant's probably not for you. But I think when you're looking at this class and you say, all right, well, who's a guy that you could swing on for upside? Kenneth Grant's going to be more in that conversation. I just feel like in such a deep defensive tackle group, a team was going to look at him and say, okay, what are the chances he's going to hit? If we're going to take him here, would we rather just wait and take Mykel Williams in the middle of the second round, or any of these other
Cam
numbers?
Jaxson in the third?
That's what I mean. Like, there are so many players that you can kind of look at and say, would we rather have that here than take that swing? So that's why with him, I said, okay, if we're talking about him 16, 17, I might take the under or later in the draft and anticipate that he goes a little bit later.
I mean, this goes back to the Jordan Davis conversation, and I think if you're going to take a guy who is a run-first defensive tackle in the first round, he better have unique traits, because otherwise I think you can get a similar player later in the draft.
I do think that he has, so like I mentioned that Jordan Davis tested better.
Yeah.
I think that Grant has shown a little bit more pass rush savvy than what Davis did at Georgia. But again, like, if you're just looking at athletic profile, like, I don't think that what Grant has put out has been quite as impressive as what Davis did.
Super chat from Fresh Prince. He says, what are your thoughts, Fran, on Jihad Campbell, the Alabama linebacker? I like him at the end of round 1 or a slight trade back, but is that too much redundancy with Zach Bond? Could that be a positive for Vic Fangio?
Yeah, I feel like that would be surprising, right?
I think it would be pretty surprising.
Yeah. I think when you're looking at Campbell, I do like the player. I don't know that I I'm not 100% convicted on him. I do think there are a lot of paths to success. He's got good size. I do think that in terms of reading things out from a stack position, he's still a little bit of a work in progress there, a relatively new player to the linebacker spot. He was an outside like edge rusher for Alabama early in his career, then moved to the stacked role for them a couple of years ago. So I think when you're looking at Campbell, still a little bit unrefined, but doesn't miss tackles. Been one of the best tacklers that I've seen coming out of college at that position. I think when you're looking at him, the coverage chops are pretty good. He can match up with tight ends and play with them in space. He's got good zone eyes. He can play the middle of the field. I think he would be a fit for Fangio, and he also brings a lot of pass rush juice. Like this is a guy that can blitz from depth. I've seen him line up on the line of scrimmage and beat tackles and win with a bull rush. Like he's got some flexibility there. Some teams view him as an edge rusher. That's why he was asked to do edge rush drills at the combine for that reason. So I do think there's a lot to like there. Had shoulder surgery. Apparently, it's like a 6 month recovery. Ooh. Yeah, like he just got it. So we're kicking into like
that's tough.
Now they did say his representation did say like we expect him to be ready for camp. It's gonna be close. It's gonna be pushing it because he got it like around combine time. So that's gonna be tight.
My answer here for likely to go later than currently projected. Mine's Mike Green from Marshall.
Yeah.
I know. Vinny, don't pay attention to this one, but putting the off-field stuff aside, which you hear is potentially serious.
If it's that's yes.
I just it's great production, but I think Jeremiah had him like top 25. And to me, there are other edge rushers who I would probably rather roll the dice on. We talked about some of the length stuff. Short arms. He didn't give a full athletic testing, and so there's some questions there. I think that teams will be a little bit skittish when it comes to the middle portion of round one on a player like Mike Green, who you're still guessing because the level of competition wasn't quite as high.
Yeah, I saw him as high as number 8 to Carolina, which only happened one time in that sample, one time to the Saints at 9. But the pick where he was most often, 9 times to the Atlanta Falcons at 15. That's rich for me on film, and then. Not even counting the off-field thing, which Atlanta, by the way, like they have not. That's not an area where they have budged like at all under this regime with Terry Fontenot. So my guess is that he would not end up in Atlanta.
All right, give me a prospect profile, whether it's statistical or something else that has caught your eye, a player who is interesting to you.
Yeah, so I wanted to do a guy that I haven't done yet. So,
that's fine.
Because I was like, all right, like just looking at numbers, like who's a player that I know I definitely want to. I want to make sure I watch him. Alabama pass rusher, Q Robinson. So redshirt senior. He's got 5 starts in his career.
Okay, all
came this season. He's only played 370 snaps on defense. That's lower than any edge rusher drafted in the last decade. So this guy has barely played. He was a late addition to the Shrine Bowl.
Okay,
did not do anything at the combine. Was invited to the combine, but didn't work out.
I know. Q, what are we doing?
All right.
He didn't play. We got to show me something.
7 TFLs and 4 sacks this year in those 5 starts. In the 300 so snaps. Extremely high production score in a obviously extremely small sample. His pass rush win rate was 23.8%. That's 90th percentile amongst edge rushers drafted in the last decade. And when you're looking at pass rush win rate, that is when you're looking at that group, who else is in the 90th percentile? It was a lot of early round picks. So you comb those guys out because he's not going to be a day 1 or day 2 pick at this profile. Who are the day 3 picks that had a win rate that high in their final season?
Okay.
Here's the list. Carl Lawson.
Great.
Anthony Nelson.
Great.
Nick Herbig.
Okay.
3 good players right now.
Anthony Nelson, clearly the best of the 3 for the actual PHLY Eagles listeners.
Jordan Smith, who I believe was out of UAB, didn't have a great year didn't have a great career. Kingsley Adibare.
Yeah, good.
A nice player for Green. That's a hit for Green Bay. That was it. That's all the day 3 guys.
Interesting.
So I'm like, okay, like that's a day 3 profile that you can get, that you can sell me on, and also only 151 run defense snaps. So it's not just all right. Well, that's what he does as a pass rusher. He had a 9.9% run stop rate, also 90th percentile.
Why couldn't my guy get on the field?
I think it was like there was a lot of injuries there.
Okay.
Now, the thing with the run stop rate, that's a little bit less predictive of a number for the day 3 guys. Like the guys that hit that in day 3 was not as impressive. But Q Robinson was a name where I'm like, okay, like it was like body type wise as well. Let me pull up his exact measurables because I didn't write those down in my notes. It was a bad job by me last night.
Not at all.
Bear with me. Here it is. So, yeah, he came in 6'4", 243 pounds, 33.5-inch arms. He played 674 snaps on special teams in his career.
Oh, wow.
So a 3-time core 4 starter. So like, all right, he's going to participate there. Yeah, he had a season-ending elbow injury in October. So that's why he missed a large chunk of this past season. But again, came back and practiced at the Shrine Bowl. Missed most of his high school senior year with a torn ligament in his ankle. So he's had a little bit of an injury history. So yeah, we got Q Robinson. That's one that hopefully by draft day, I've had a chance to go through Robinson's film.
Okay, I'm gonna follow up with you, maybe on next week's show.
It won't be by next week.
Okay, maybe in 2 weeks' show.
All right, deal.
Mine is less about a statistical profile and just a profile himself, a player we haven't talked about a lot, and I just want to get your thoughts on him. Because to me, he looks like a guy who maybe makes sense in the second round. However, when you're talking about centers, there is something to a guy who has played a lot of football.
Oh, that's a good one, yeah.
But Jared Wilson from Georgia, athletically, everything you want from a center.
Yep.
And, based on your write-up, the tape looked good in his 1 year as a starter for Georgia. But are you concerned about why couldn't he get on the field earlier?
Well, they had... And the memory is the name is escaping right now, but they had a veteran center the last 3 years that they team captain, like was beloved in that program. He was a center only, and Wilson with his build
6'3", 310. It would be a stretch to go to guard, but
and especially putting him next to another smaller center. So that's why he was kind of held to backup duties. But that's why I was a little bit surprised that he came out. I'm looking through really quickly. All right, so these are there is a pathway for guys that come out with low numbers of starts. But here's the thing. He's got what? Do you have the number on how many games he started in his career?
I don't right on me, but I will get it.
I got it actually right here. Yeah, so he started 12 games. It was just the season. So he started 12 games. That's
tough at center, right?
That is the fewest of any interior lineman drafted in the last decade.
He's from Winston-Salem.
Oh, there you go. Go Deeks.
Yeah.
Well, maybe not. But the only other guy that had fewer starts than him at interior offensive line was Reggie McKenzie when he was coming out of Tennessee. He was a defensive tackle.
The Raiders GM?
Who's his son. Yeah, his son. Right. So Andy Reid drafted him, but he was a defensive tackle at Tennessee, and they said, "Oh, we're moving him to interior offensive line." It didn't work out. Everybody else had more starts.
Yeah.
So that is very
That's
difficult.
the position of center and linebacker and safety, those up the middle positions where you got to read everything. Those are the positions where I like to look at how much did you play? How much did the coaches trust you to get on the field early? And so with Wilson, I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
But you got to answer that question.
I had this conversation with somebody pre-combine. It was right after I went through the film because the center class in free agency was not great. The center class in the draft is not great. So I'm like, this kid's film is really good, but if you are a team that needs a center, I don't know that this is the answer because I don't know that you want to just plug him in right now.
Right.
That's a tough one to swallow. That's a good call out by you.
Shout out to Idiot Sandwich. Cedric Van Pran Granger.
That's it. Cedric Van Pran. That's it.
All right. Now tell me about a guy whose profile doesn't look so great, but you believe in the player anyway. The film overweighs the profile.
Yeah, there are a lot of these guys. And I'm going to go with one that we talked about last week, so I don't need to go too deep on it. But the one that stands out like a sore thumb for me when I was just looking at the list, who are the guys where I'm like, this should scare me off, but I just really like the tape. Is Siobhan Revel, the corner from ECU, and it's another small sample size, only 15 starts at a Group of 5 school, less than 900 snaps played. But you're talking about a player that's got height, weight, speed for days, all the traits. By the way, coming off an ACL, so he tore his ACL in September. So limited experience this past year. But again, the production is really good. The traits are all there. We had an incomplete athletic profile and just a very small sample size at a lower level of competition. That's the scary part of the profile.
For sure. Now, on the PHLY Eagles show this afternoon at 2 o'clock, we're going to be talking tight ends.
Yeah.
And so my one here for like the player despite the profile, I got to give you a little bit of a nod here because the profile to me is undrafted and not even talk to him as an undrafted free agent. And now I watched him and he was kind of fun to watch. Maybe in the 6th round I would think about it. Your boy Jackson Hawes.
Oh,
I mean, he's old and doesn't catch the ball, but I
Yeah.
watched him and I liked him.
I know.
He moves like a big old man.
Well, did you watch any blocking, or did you just watch the catching stuff?
Well, I watched some of the blocking.
Oh, so the blocking is what moves the needle for me. That's what gets me going. But the receiving numbers, I actually updated. I went through all the tight ends just to make sure like all my numbers were updated before our conversation today. Like the receiving stuff's not good.
It's so bad.
It's not.
He's caught like 9 passes.
0.77 yards per route run in his career. Now he had a career high this year moving from Yale to Georgia Tech. So it's like, okay, like, he was featured more in the offense there than he was previously in the Ivy League. But the last 2 years was not targeted once, 20 plus yards down the field. Everything is underneath, get the ball in his hands, let the big man roll. To me, like his value is as a blocker. Like he's coming in and that's what he's going to be. And I do think, given the film and given the size profile, like I think that he could be like one of the dominant blocking tight ends in football, which like those guys get paid $4 to $5 million a year. Like I think that he can come out and he can be that kind of a backup player.
All right, last one before we get to the conversation about the range for some possible Eagles targets,
Okay.
And that is just a guy who you don't know what to make of. This is you're sort of shrugging your shoulders, throwing your hands up. What do I make of this guy, and who is that for you?
Yeah, I alluded to it earlier, but it's Ole Miss wide receiver Trey Harris. I like the film with Trey Harris. I don't love it, but I do like the film. So Trey Harris is a redshirt senior. He's going to be 23 years old for his first training camp. 6'2" and change, 205 pounds, pretty good length. 40 starts in his career, over 2,200 snaps played in his career. So he's played a lot of ball. Started his career at Louisiana Tech. Transferred to Ole Miss after the 2022 season. So he's played the last 2 years for Lane Kiffin in that offense. I'd say that I like the film. I don't love it. It's a very unrefined route tree. It's one of those guys where it's like, all right, he runs, hitches, double moves, posts. It's a very limited route tree there, and I would say like the route running is unspectacular. Like it's not terrible. I've definitely seen worse from guys with that role, but I'd like to see a little bit more. He's good at the catch point. His numbers are stupid, like crazy. 3 yards per route run in his career.
Yeah, it's insane.
Insane. This past season, 5.12 yards per route run, which that blows the record, like blows away the record. Insane. He got hurt. It was like a soft tissue. I think it was a hamstring that cost him or maybe it might have been a groin, whatever it was, down the stretch, the second half of the year. But for the first half of the season, he was bonkers. They could not stop and they could not defend him. I kind of think that he's like a wide receiver 3, 4. I compared him to a Josh Reynolds. Some people love him. Some people are like, round 2, this guy is like a big body, vertical threat, like not DK Metcalf, but like that, that body type. I'm not quite there. Again, I have a Josh Reynolds where that's like wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4. It just goes back to like that Ole Miss offense.
I was just going to say, it goes back to the Jaxson Dart conversation, right?
Where you look at the guys that have come out of that offense. Can you actually riff for a second? Because I can pull. I just want to see it because I actually haven't looked it up since I had this conversation.
All right, I will tease that coming up in a few minutes. We're going to talk about the range to expect for some possible Eagles targets at the back end of the first round. We've talked about Malachi Starks. We've talked about Nick Emmanwori. Walter Nolen we've talked about, but what about Donovan Ezeiruaku and James Pierce Jr.? So we'll go through those guys. Are you ready?
All right, I'm ready. All right, so Lane Kiffin's first year at Ole Miss was 2020. So since 2020, here are the offensive playmakers that have been drafted from that offense. Everyone loved, including me, Elijah Moore. Goes in the second round, did not hit. Matt Corral, 3rd round pick, did not hit. Snoop Connor, running back, 5th round pick, did not hit. You got a couple defensive players. Actually, none of them hit either. Go 2023, Jonathan Mingo, 2nd round, doesn't hit. Running back, Zach Evans, doesn't hit. And then 2024 was all defensive players. So none of those guys. And then even like there were undrafted players. There was the kid Drummond, who was like a big slot a couple years ago.
I remember that,
Yeah, didn't hit. We talked about, one of the things we don't like about the Quinshon Judkins is how much of his yardage came against light boxes. His first 2 years were at Ole Miss, for this offense.
How hard is it for you? You always hear don't scout the helmet.
Don't scout the helmet, no question. Yes.
And so how tough is that?
But it's not necessarily like about scouting the helmet, because I'm not comparing. It's like, I don't want to draft this Miami. I don't want to draft this Miami defensive end because Jerome McDougal didn't work out. right? You're looking at the system, and you're looking like this is what projects, right? And so, like Xavier Williams, the wide receiver from TCU, he plays essentially like the same roles, has to do the same things in the same offense that Trey Burks was at Arkansas. And it's like, yeah, like Burks had issues transitioning to the NFL. Like there are going to be concerns there. So I do think you have to include that in the evaluation.
Okay, good conversation.
Trey Harris is scary, but I mean, he could be good, and he's a great kid. Like everyone you talk to is like, oh, the kid's awesome. Like everyone loves him. Good work ethic. Like if anyone's gonna hit, it would be him. But it's a scary projection.
Don't you think that if you were running a team, if you were running a draft room, it's hard to pull a trigger on a guy who you don't feel strongly about, right? You only get so many picks.
You only get so many,
right? So you might as well take a guy who you feel better about the projection.
Yeah, there are a few ways where that like comes to roost. It's like you have these profiles this way. It might be, hey, you know what? Like this guy had a good season, but he was just okay at the Senior Bowl, and then didn't work out at the combine. And it's like, oh, like I don't know, like I don't know. Rather than taking a guy where the arrow is pointing down in the last 2 months, like I want a guy who's like Gray Zabel, where film was good, Senior Bowl was good, combine was good, like interview was good. Like, yeah, I want this guy.
The flip side is, one thing I've heard about the Eagles is, from Howie Roseman's point of view, one thing that he feels very acutely and is projected onto the scouting staff is just FOMO. Like he doesn't want to miss out on a guy who could be special. And so, it's go do that extra homework on that guy. That is like acutely how it's the same conversation we have about Howie Roseman. Like the thing that makes him stay awake at night is the idea that somebody in the league is available who he doesn't realize is available, right?
Yeah.
That's how he feels. Like that's how he operates the front office is deep FOMO. And so a player like that is maybe intriguing to him from that standpoint.
And it's interesting too. I remember hearing this a few years ago. And I don't know at what point this changed, or if this did, it might just been this was the first time I heard of it. But the Eagles have a very large scouting staff, right? And it's I would say a lot of people would describe it as a top heavy scouting staff, right? Where it's a lot of college directors and assistant GMs and directors of player personnel, like guys,
and then guys who have come in from being general managers or directors of personnel elsewhere and now are just sort of advisory.
And you have coaches, like coaches are very involved, right? And so you are going to, if you are Walter Nolen, like it's not like, oh yeah, area scout, college director, and Howie, watch it. You're going to have double-digit sets of eyeballs have watched and written up Walter Nolen, right? And so, with the Eagles, and a lot of other teams do this too. This is not like specific to the Eagles, but we want to know as soon as possible who are the guys that could be great players. And to your point, like we want to know who they are, but as early as possible. So you want your scouts in the summer when you're getting ready for the following draft. If you think this guy could be one of those guys, we need to know about him fast so we can get multiple sets of eyeballs through, and we can start, making sure we can do all the legwork possible on him.
Interesting. That's good. That's a good way to think about it.
Yeah.
Super chat from Fresh Prince, who says he's going to send a super chat on the show this afternoon. I mean, double dipping. Okay. We appreciate that. But how do you think ZB will feel about EJ Smith saying that Olivia Reiner is Jeffrey Lurie's favorite on the beat?
I know.
EJ said ZB's time has come to an end. Unfortunately, I think that he's right.
Oh wow, really?
And so I think that this is one that Zach is gonna be rolling around with, and has been poking around his brain. I will tell you that he was not thrilled with how Monday night's party went. I don't think he got the FaceTime that he was hoping for.
No. Yeah, I haven't seen him yet, so I haven't had a chance to talk to him.
We can discuss it more on the show this afternoon.
I look forward to it.
All right, give me. We want to talk about some of the range for these potential Eagles targets.
Yeah.
Now you did the work, which people can check out on the consensus mock draft last week. But some of these guys who have been in focus for us, take us through like how realistic it is that they could be on the board at 32.
Yeah, so we talked through Walter Nolen earlier, and I said we would get to this part of the conversation. So basically, in those 36 mock drafts, Walter Nolen was available for the Eagles 14 times out of 36. So pretty often he was there on the board. 8 times the Eagles passed. 6 times the Eagles took him in those situations. So as high as number 8, so 1 time number 8, 1 time number 11, 3 times at 12 to Dallas, 3 times at 16 to Arizona, 4 times to Cincinnati at 17. So nice little cluster where he's in the top 20, but then a number of drafts where he was falling to the back end of round 1 and certainly to the Eagles at 32.
Okay. How about James Pierce Jr.?
James Pierce Jr., also another player. Now, I would say that the landing spots for Pierce are not as widespread. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 9 different landing spots for James Pierce, but it's all big clusters. 4 times to Atlanta at 15. That's the highest. 4 times to Arizona. That's the 16. 4 times to Cincinnati. That's where he ended up being the pick in that mock draft. That's at 17. 3 times to Tampa at 19. So that's 15 picks, 15 out of 36, where he is going in the top 20. Now, he fell out of round 1 altogether in 11 of these mock drafts. So 15 times he's going in the top. He's going in the top 19, and then he was available for the Eagles in 15 of them. So again, it's pretty wide variance there for James Pierce, just more streamlined in terms of what the team fits were.
Okay, let's stick at that same position with Donovan Ezeiruaku.
Yeah, he was available for the Eagles in 22 of 36 mock drafts.
Okay.
So pretty often that he was available. He fell out of the first round, so the Eagles passed on him in the situation 19 of those 22 times. So he was pegged to the Eagles in 3 of those 36 mock drafts, including, I know he was Zach's pick, right? In one of the more recent mock drafts.
That's right. Ezeiruaku?
Ezeiruaku. Right over the bridge that way?
That way.
My first gut was that, or it was the right direction. As high as Atlanta to number 15 2 times. You saw him kind of a smattering here and there, but really it doesn't start picking up. 3 times Buffalo at 30, 3 times the Eagles at 32. But outside of that, it really feels like Ezeiruaku more commonly is seen as a second-round pick in mock drafts.
And I know you don't love him as much as Zach does. If it was a trade down to the middle of the second round, would you feel okay with that?
I think so. So here's where I'm at with Ezeiruaku. He's a little bit undersized. Putting him and Nolan Smith opposite each other, you probably want a little bit more size there. I don't think he's as good a run defender as Nolan is and was. I don't think he's the athlete Nolan is and was. I do think that he's a more polished rusher than Nolan was coming out. I think that he's got a more well-developed pass rush plan. I thought that he was really crisp at the Senior Bowl. I thought he showed the ability to win at BC. Was extremely productive. So, again, I'm someone that believes in production on the defensive side. So I do love that. I don't know that the ceiling is super, super high with Ezeiruaku, and that's why he's going to be a little bit lower for me. I do think that he could be a solid rusher, and he's probably just more of like your number 2 and potentially like a number 3 rusher if he's limited against the run.
How does James Pierce fit into that conversation?
Pierce is tricky because everything with him is like speed. He's supposed to run around you. I
don't think that sounds like a Vic Fangio guy to me.
It does not, personally, no. And I think that his run defense is like a check the box kind of thing, but it's not. It doesn't move the needle. There's some talk about like behind the scenes, like off field stuff too. But I think when you're looking at Pierce, just like stylistically as a rusher, like I compared him to Vic Beasley. There are years where you can get a guy like a Vic Beasley and he can be extremely productive. Kind of like what happened with Bryce Huff. Like there are years where you have that guy and he can be productive. I don't know if I'm taking that swing in the top 20. It's a matter of like how soon do you want to try and take that swing on that kind of player?
All right, give us last thing, the range on the 2 big safeties, Malachi Starks and Nick Emmanwori.
All right, so with Malachi Starks, he was available for the Eagles 10 times. Nick Emmanwori was available 17 times. Now,
but
what I would say,
if you're doing it more recently, that would not be the case.
So
right?
the cases where Malachi Starks fell out of the first round, they all have happened since the combine. The cases where Emmanwori fell out mostly were before the combine. So they have kind of swapped places in a lot of mock drafts. There are still mocks out there that have Starks going before Emmanwori. Clearly, there are still mocks that have Emmanwori falling to the back stages of round 1. The earliest we've seen Emmanwori go has been 14 to Indianapolis. The earliest we've seen Starks go in mock drafts was as high as number 9 to the Saints. It feels like that's not going to happen at this point. He's probably more back end round 1. I could see Emmanwori going as high as that. Honestly, I actually really like that Colts fit. I think that would make a lot of sense for them. So that would be one certainly worth watching.
So let's say Nolen, Starks, Emmanwori are all off the board. Who would be your ideal Eagles pick at 32?
Me personally?
Yeah.
I love Gray Zabel. So if Zabel's there, that would be the guy I would have the most juice for.
Yeah, him and Emmanwori are the 2 guys who I think of as your guys in this draft class.
All right, I can take that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, good stuff, Fran. Thank you so much. We will be back next week with another edition of the PHLY Draft Show with Fran Duffy. I think at some point over the next couple weeks, we're going to do a second show and maybe do just all questions. Come in the chat, and we'll be doing It's not a mailbag.
It's not a mailbag.
It's
Are
a
you
chat
sure?
bag.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. Not a mailbag.
Much different. It's much more. It's more jazz.
More free flowing.
More free flowing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Defiant jazz.
Yeah. A chat bag.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, drum up the interest.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody, for the super chats.
Thank you for the super chats. We'll talk to you next week. Next Tuesday, we'll be returning. We got them all right? Yeah, we'll be returning next Tuesday at noon with the next PHLY draft show with Fran Duffy. And then, of course, check out the PHLY Eagles show today at 2 o'clock. We are beginning our draft position previews with tight end. Is Colston Loveland a good pick potentially for the Eagles at 32? We'll talk about it later. Thanks for watching the show. We'll talk to you next week.
We all silly like the mayor.